Okay.
Are we live? Okay, cool. Hi, thanks for joining us tonight. Between Us About Them is a dispersed group exhibition about the space in between, in which 5 curators take the artwork of 5 artists into their homes. It is a web project which was developed by the 2021 Curatorial Practice Program cohort at the California College of Arts as part of the Paulette Long Shepard Pollock Art Community Experiment, or PLAySPACE, which is a graduate student-run exhibition program. Tonight, we are hosting a roundtable discussion to mark the end of Between Us About Them, the second half of our year-long investigation of scale. We have the privilege of speaking with the 5 artists who so graciously allowed my classmates and I to take their artwork into our homes as part of this project. So I'm going to briefly introduce you to them now. Esther Ellia is a visual artist from Turlock, California. She completed her BFA in illustration at the California College of Arts and is currently attending the University of New Mexico, working on an MFA in painting. Her work is a mix of sculptural furniture pieces, clothing, and large-scale paintings that use family folklore as the basis for understanding mixed ethnicity, and more broadly, the question of how to be Middle Eastern in diaspora. Emily Markert hosted Esther's artwork for Between Us About Them. Maria Guzmán Capron lives and works in Oakland, California. She received an MFA from California College of the Arts in 2015 and her BFA from the University of Houston in 2004. Some recent exhibitions include At the Pith at Nook Gallery, Female Trouble 2 at Colt Amy Freiberg exhibitions, Body Spray at Buffalo Institute for Contemporary Art, Don't Eat Me at Delhi Gallery, and Through Her Eye at Mana Contemporary. She is a co-founder and past member of Control Shift Collective, an exhibition space and 13 studios located in West Oakland and operating with an emphasis on collaborating with underrepresented art communities, including women artists, artists of color, and queer and non-binary artists. She also works as a full-time mother and a part-time facilitator at Naiad Art Center, a progressive art studio helping more than 60 artists with developmental disabilities create art. And Leandra Burnett hosted Maria's work for Between Us About Them. Heesoo Kwon is a visual artist and anthropologist from South Korea, currently based in Oakland, California. Kwon received her Master's of Fine Art from UC Berkeley in 2019. Her work has been the subject of solo exhibitions at Et al., CICA Museum, and Visual Space in South Korea. She has participated in group exhibitions at CICA Museum, the Worth Writer Art Gallery, Root Division, SOMARTS, and Embark Gallery, among others. In 2012, Kwon received the Female Inventor of the Year Award from the Korean Intellectual Property Office. Her other accolades include the Young Korean Artist Award from the CICA Museum and the Rosalind Snyder Eisner Prize for Photos and Art Practice from UC Berkeley. Catherine Hamilton hosted Heesoo's work for Between Us About Them. Cathy Lu's work manipulates traditional Chinese art objects and symbols as a way to deconstruct the assumptions we have about Asian American identity and cultural authenticity. By creating ceramics-based sculptures and large-scale installations, Lu explores what it means to be both Asian and American while not being entirely accepted as either. Unpacking how experiences of immigration, cultural hybridity, and cultural assimilation become part of the larger American identity is central to her work. Cathy lives and works in Richmond, California, and I had the pleasure of hosting Cathy's work for Between Us About Them. Finally, Christine Lyon is a painter, printmaker, educator, and textile artist currently residing in San Francisco, working in oil, acrylic, etching, silkscreen, and soft sculpture. Christine explores representation and methodologies of figurative art and her body's relationship to icons of that tradition. Her collections have been featured in galleries in New York and California, including a piece in the private collection of Georgianne Aldrich of the Aldrich Museum of Contemporary Art. She earned her Bachelor's of Art degree at Sarah Lawrence College, where she focused on art, literature, and social sciences, and she received her MFA from California College of the Arts in spring 2020. Youyou Ma hosted Christine's work for Between Us About Them. So it's so exciting to have this group all together this evening. This is actually our first time that we've all been together since we began this project in October. If you are in the audience and you have questions, please submit them via the QA box at the bottom of your screen. And so to kick things off, I thought I would just propose a very broad question to the artists in our group, just to sort of familiarize everyone with your practices a bit. I'm wondering if you could each speak to the role that hybridity or in-betweenness plays in your art making practice or your studio practice. If someone just wants to like jump in.
Sure. Well, I think something that I've been thinking about a lot in betweenness is not, I think you can see in my work that it references photo montage. So there's imagery I'm using is, you know, there's this language of 2 times at the same time. And so that in-betweenness exists in my painting, but also I've been thinking a lot more as we think of new ways to exhibit artwork, the in-betweenness between the world of the painting and the world outside of it, and how to indicate to those 2 spaces and what those 2 spaces can be, you know, as exhibition spaces are changing and trying to be more creative. Outdoor space and indoor space are things being explored, and a lot of the compositions the imagery of my compositions invoke an indoor space. And so it's interesting to think about the positioning of the space in which they're in. So this project in particular is very interesting to me because I am often invoking domestic space. So exhibiting in the domestic space, how does that in between the real and the not real and the illustrative, what those in between spaces are and what they evoke and how they play off of each other. I'm thinking about more and more even as I create new work now.
I think going off of that, exhibiting in the home and thinking about, so I create a lot of things for the home, and I think that hybridity is all over my work. But I think with that specifically, it's going between the home as I grew up in it, like the real experienced home, and then the home that was lost, or even the imagined home from the homeland, which I don't have access to and can't see and have to pull from, like what I see in this real home and what I hear. And so I think, yeah, this was really nice to have my objects as art objects in a home. That was like this third space. And I think generally that's the hybridity in my work is just, and the in-between is just the struggle between the experienced and the imagined. What I am and what I'm supposed to be as far as identity goes, and what I want to be, and the inaccessibility of that, I think.
Yeah, I think if I can just piggyback off that real quick, I mean, the artists of this show, including myself, are really looking at identity and like the flimsiness of that. And I think in a way it's the attachment, but it's also the being in a part of an identity and making work about that. It means you're making work about yourself, but you're also making work about the anxiety of representing not only yourself. And I think that, you know, when I'm looking at my work, yes, it's a lot about womanhood, but a lot of it is about white womanhood and looking at icons of white women in the tradition of the art archive. And there's a lot of anxiety and weirdness I feel in connection to that figure, like that hybridity of me and not me, and seeing myself but not myself. And I think I see that in a lot of the artists here, this tension between identity and seeing yourself, but also knowing that your self doesn't all encompass what that is to be in that identity, if that makes sense. So it's really a focus on, it's, at least for me, it's kind of this narcissistic obsession that circles around and eats its own tail of like the anxiety of me and not me in seeing myself in identities.
I feel it's so interesting to talk about identity in the work, especially when Leon's work enter my room. And I think there's something more beyond of the race, but because of we are both the women, and we can feel a kind of connection and through this painting, and also some mixed identity in this painting. So it's so grateful to like have this kind of conversation.
Yeah, Kathy, does any of that resonate with you? I didn't have your work in my home, but as Shay and I were working on our curatorial, work for the show, we got to know, all 5 artists' work, but it specifically looks like there's some kind of, that tension of hybridity and identity in your work, if you want to speak to that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I actually don't really think about hybridity. I don't know, I guess it's not the word I used when I think about like the experience. I think for me, I don't know, just sort of like my own personal experience, I guess, of like being Asian American and being part of an immigrant community. I think a lot of times people try to simplify cultures or identities, like I think people find a lot of comfort in being like, I mean, you usually hear this apply to food, like, oh, this is authentic Chinese food, like this is authentic Mexican food. But in actuality, like, I feel like there's this idea of like authenticity that doesn't actually exist. Like everything changes based on the context and experience. And I guess I also was sort of reflecting too, like thinking about, I don't know, people with like hyphenated identities, I guess like in between identities or multiple identities. I don't know, I think a lot of times, like at least for myself, people are like, oh, okay, so you're like Chinese and American. So it's like, half this, half that. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. But in reality, it's like not that simple. I feel, I feel like there's been much more like writing about like third spaces or third cultures. And I think that's kind of like sort of how I think about it now, like thinking of not an in-between space, but like a new space, like another level space or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with Kathy that there's not, I don't know, I don't see it even as a one state kind of, and specifically for my work, what I see is that they were always transforming and they were always changing. And then I'm seeking to embrace more that state of continuous change. And so each piece is maybe trying to capture a moment, an instant in which maybe you kind of solidify for a little bit and you can see that. But even more than hybrid, I think it's liquid. It's always moving. So yeah, and I think the materials that I use lend themselves to that, with the softness, but also there's an infinite way of working with them and mixing them, also not having any hierarchy for what is fine art material or not, but really embracing making with it in its entirety, and the fun and the invention that can be found in that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Heesoo, does any of that, about transformative space as the betweenness resonate for you? Heesoo, am I the only one who can't hear? Hold on.
I feel like the headset doesn't work, sorry. Okay, let me, yeah. So I feel like my work was video, and I'm working on digital mediums. So I feel like my experience was quite different from other artists. And I think this exhibition was quite interesting for me because till now, I transformed actual spaces like galleries or like my physical room, bedroom, or like my house in Korea to digital model, and I made some game and video about it and presented it in art galleries. But it was my first time to present my video work about other spaces, which is digitalized in another person's home. So watching the transformation was really interesting for me. And personally, I had really intense emotional feeling. I was really grateful. And it was, I remember when I had the solo show at all, and I could watch my ancestors and myself's metamorphosis in the gallery space. And this time I saw the metamorphosis in Kat's house and her grandma's bathroom. And I had almost similar grateful feeling to watch it. So I feel like my experience was I like that. Thank you.
It looks like we have a question about sort of the scale of the artworks in the homes of the curators. So asking if the artists had to scale down their artwork, or if the curators had to scale up their homes, I think is the question, to accommodate the works. And so, I mean, for me, I'll just briefly say, and then, other people can answer, that we actually selected these works thinking they would be in a gallery exhibition. And we selected them to be quite large. So, and we kept all of the works that we had originally chosen. So we didn't change the scale of the artist's artworks. For me, in hosting Cathy's piece, which is quite big, and it's multiple smaller pieces, I did sort of take it apart, and I would love to talk to you about that, Cathy, maybe after we're done talking about this part. But so I sort of segmented her work in a way to allow it to fit into my home, because it was taking up my one table. I'm curious if other people, like Youyou, Christine's piece is quite large, how you made that work or fit.
Yeah, actually, the score of this page is so large, and it's occupying my whole wall in my bedroom. But when I put it in front of my bed, and I can see it, when I wake up or when I go to sleep. So this kind of this position made me occasionally or to think about her work and the figure in her painting. So this lifelike score is also one benefit when I put it in my home. Yeah, so that's nice.
I feel like mine.
Question
Oh,
also-
Emily, you go.
Sorry, the question also highlights, I think, something that we don't necessarily explicitly say that often, but that this exhibition does loosely connect to an exhibition we held in the spring, which also centered on the concept of scale. And so this curatorial conceit is really kind of a more complex or a more nuanced interpretation of the word or the definition of scale. And that first exhibition in the spring was a much more literal exploration of scale of artwork in relation to gallery spaces as, white cube structures and kind of the burden of those spaces and how they impact how we see artworks. And so I think the fact that we used only extant works for this show rather than commissioning anything new, for example, I think is what makes the experience of living with them really kind of more dynamic and more complex, because it was really us finding, right, we had to find the right places in our homes to accommodate them, to make sure they wouldn't be subject to, someone else we live with accidentally knocking something over or, getting too much light or something like that, but also wanting them to be kind of on display because this was the stand-in for the gallery exhibition that was originally conceived. So I just wanted to say that as a way to kind of bridge this, as this is kind of our culminating event, both for this exhibition, but also our year-long kind of takeover of the CCA PLAySPACE gallery, just to sort of tie those themes together more specifically. And I don't know if the word or the concept of scale specifically resonates with any of you, the artists in this show, as something that you really actively think about when you're making your work. I know we've just touched on, the scale of Christine's paintings and Cathy's larger installation assemblage sort of piece, but I don't know if it's something that all of you give consideration to.
Well, I'm sorry. I know that we discussed my piece, so I don't want to take up too much time, but I think that a lot of the scale I see in relation to this body of work is in relationship to the human figure and how it relates to, these game pieces, this rug. These are these objects that are in relationship to tactility and our body. And but in terms of my own work, I'm thinking about scale a lot, and I think about scale not only in terms of my own body, but in terms of media. So a lot of my things are in relationship to screens. So it will either be the same 9:3 ratio of a television screen, but larger, or somehow in relation to film screens. Sometimes I, flip the rectangle the other way. It's in relationship to a phone screen. So I am thinking about scale a lot when I'm making my work. But I was seeing that in the collection of work, at least to me, when I was looking at everyone's work, it feels like it's a scale in relationship to the self. Or that's how I saw it.
What about you, Maria? Because we showed for this, like Leandra has the quite large textile piece on the wall, but then the soft sculpture is like this very sort of, it's almost like handheld size. So I'd be interested to hear how you think of scale in your practice.
Yeah, I love mixing it up. For me, some of the wall hangings, even sculptures, have gotten very large. And then sometimes I'm like, to me, it's a way of exploring material, but an idea, and there's pleasure in both ways of making the large work allows you to really be more expressive, maybe with like giant or like bigger movements, you know, and bigger strokes of fabric and color, and so allows for more movement in some way. But the smaller works are it becomes more about like this jewel-like experience of working on something, of taking the time, of making tiny stitches, little movements. And so the thing about scale for me is just that I enjoy both, and it depends on what I want to make. But yeah, they're very different. They feel different, and I like that.
Yes, I noticed that the tiger's face has so much detail in comparison to your other sculptural works. Some of the sculptures that you have up at Part 2 Gallery right now, their features are outlined in wire, and your use of yarn or thread sort of seems to explode like in this really unruly way, whereas the tiger's features, you know, his mouth is, or their mouth is open with like a mesh, and each tooth is so distinct. So sitting next to it day by day, I'd rotate it because it was sitting in front of a window, and the two parts, the face and the beadwork on the bikini bottom, they're never visible at the same time from the same vantage point. So I would rotate it now and then to present different angles, but also so I could see all the different details of it, which is something I hadn't experienced before, living with a sculpture that's sort of in three-dimensional space where I'm living. So that was a really new experience. Thank you.
Yeah, you got to look at sculpture from all the angles. That's the beauty of it. But yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, that tiger piece is very different. It's different from a lot of the other works, and it was made for to be with a specific idea of exoticization, like being exoticized as a person of color, as a woman, and that idea, the association with animals like a tiger maybe, and sexuality and being attractive too. So it was combining all those elements and an idea of being ferocious too. That's why so much attention to the teeth and the mouth.
Maria, I'm curious, do you think about ferocity in terms of scale? Like, does that have anything to do with your work becoming larger? Do you feel like that has a relationship to ferocity?
I think some of the pieces have an aspect that is ferocious. It depends on the work. But scale, yeah, I think I can see that in both smaller works and larger works. But yeah, there's, I think I like to take in, for some of these characters, they take parts that maybe are more bestial or animal, and trying to adopt them or just live in that space, just wear that, a little bit of that animal persona for a bit to see how it feels. And some of that, I think in those moments, you can find some ferocity, some wildness, some, you know, untamed characteristics.
I would also love to hear from Esther a little bit about that question of like scale and human bodiness, because both of the pieces that were in this show were kind of like posing as furniture. One was a rug and the other a backgammon board. And initially we had found out about Esther's work through, there was something set up in CCA and it was these chairs. and I was like, there's no way you could sit on that, but they were so cool. So yeah, I went, oh yeah. I was like, I'm not. But yeah, if you could talk a little bit about that kind of, human scale or scale to the human body in your practice and making.
Yeah, it definitely depends on what I'm doing. I think using scale for the first time was with like large acrylic paintings of family photos. And I needed to be encompassed by these figures that felt so large from, my past that I didn't know. I know these family members, but they played such a huge role in where I am today. I like physically, regionally. And so that like scale in that sense was really important. Scale for these pieces in this show, the rug and the backgammon board were part of this expanded body of work that you're talking about, where I was very intent on furnishing the home in a very literal way, where the objects also told about who they came from and the stories of why the home needs to be refurnished. That comes from our history of having to flee different places, both in a deeper historical sense, but also as like a minority group within the Middle East. Our homes were occupied and have been occupied for the last century. And so this idea of possessions was really important to recreate, number one, recreate those possessions, but also recognize what I do have, which are these stories, and merge those two things together. And so, the chairs, nobody wanted to sit in them, but they can be sat in. Like they're supposed to be like these very literal furnishings of the home. And this rug, no one wants to step on it, but it's a functional rug. The backgammon board can be played. It's supposed to be like the literal objects, just kind of injected with the history and the family narratives.
So I wonder if I can piggyback onto that and sort of like turn this to Kathy, a question that I have for you. So you also use a lot of found objects or like create things that sort of are disguised as functional objects. And I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you see those smaller pieces interacting with one another into this larger piece. And specifically, like, I guess, what is the role of the individual object in relation to the larger installation?
I was also just looking at the website. It's amazing. Sorry, just want to comment on that. Thinking about scale too, like I basically made the flag out of those discarded red, white, and blue bags they found at the dump. And so that was like to scale of a governmental flag. And that's kind of how I sort of like made, that connection. But yeah, I tend to like work with a lot of smaller pieces that sort of combine to create like a larger piece, I guess. And with that piece, I'd been thinking a lot about, I'm a ceramicist too, so I think all the time about ceramics and the different ways we engage with ceramics. And I think at the time I was thinking so much about like going to the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco and then going to Chinatown. They're pretty close together, they're walkable. And just sort of seeing like the same things, like oh, I see this like beautiful vase that, you know, is given a lot of space and reverence and lighting. And you could see the little like earthquake armatures that someone like carefully painted to be the same color as the vase. But then conversely, I could walk to Chinatown and see like a very similar vase or almost the same vase. Like I might not be able to tell the difference, like if someone had switched it. Like I don't know that even with my experience with ceramics for the last 2 decades, like I don't know that I could tell the difference at all. And so I really think a lot about like the space that is given to objects. Like, you know, in Chinatown, like it's sort of like in those trinket shops, it's like, you know, we just have a ton of this, like, it's like a mass, it's like so much, and we're just trying to sell it, like get it out the door, and the price tag is like on the vase, you know? And it's all crowded, it's all like stacked. Some of them are still in boxes, some of them are dusty, and there's like not really any space given to them. And yeah, so I think a lot about like the individual objects, but also just like in the context, I think about that a lot, like where they live, because again, like going, you know, just going between the museum and like the trinket shop, it was like, oh, this could be the same object. It was made the same way, possibly, you know, the same type of artisans making these objects. And yet one has so much more value than the other. But I don't know that I can tell the difference. I don't know that most people can tell the difference. So yeah, I do like to work with like, I don't know, ceramics is also like all about space and weight and heaviness. It's so heavy and it like takes up so much space. So I think I spent a lot of time just sort of thinking too about like, I like the idea of like smaller bodies coming together to create larger forms, because I think that also speaks to like, you know, people too, and like communities and cultures. It's like, you know, alone, we're only so much, but then when you put something all together, when people come together, like just something new and exciting happens for me. Yeah.
That all resonates so much with my experience of having these pieces here. Like having them all together, there is just like this insane heft and weight and like fragility to them. But then
I love the photos you took.
Oh, good.
Oh my God, everyone's work looks so great inside the homes, like so amazing. I'm so sorry. I just got a chance just earlier to look at them. But yeah, seeing them on like looking at my ceramics on your table, it's like, it reminds me of like a thrift store. Like, and it's so funny to think about like the value of art, because again, all of that is kind of like artificial too in a certain degree. Not to like devalue art making, like I'm totally like a proponent of art making and value it so much, but yeah, it's like thinking about these things that we make or videos or whatever, it's like to a certain degree, it's like, how is that so different from anything else? So I just love that, like looking at your home, like on the table, just the way it's on a table, I'm like, oh, it's like a garage sale. Like I could get one of those vases for like $2. I don't know.
And then it was fun to like test them out like in different places. Like I put that plate, like there's like this porcelain looking plate that has this very fine line drawing on it. I like put it in the cupboard with the other plates, and it's like, how is this plate different or similar to the ones that it's sitting next to? And I think like your clues to that are very like fine pointed and small. Like there's these tiny figures that are dancing across the landscape that you might not notice otherwise. Yeah, that was an aspect of being with your work that I really appreciated.
Perhaps this is a good segue to a question that Jamie asked in the chat, which was to address to the curators. How was living with a work different than the experience of seeing it in a gallery? How did your interaction and reflections on the work change in the times of COVID, if at all? And in our conversation just now, I was thinking about how similar it feels like what some of you are talking about in terms of working with hybridity or multiple identities, or pulling from different forms of use or different forms of storytelling and representation in each of these works. How you all sort of bring these different elements together through the process of making the work, and then sort of viewing it later, and how we in the process of displaying the work, we're sort of in an in-between place where our homes are not totally our private home, and that, you know, now that we all have, well, all 5 of us are students, so we all have class on Zoom, and we have so many aspects of our personal life that are sort of renegotiated in order to have our living spaces also be our working spaces, and now also these exhibition spaces. And so it's definitely not like having the work in a gallery, but it's also not quite the same as owning a work or having it be something that's a permanent part of your home. And because we're trying to find different ways, each of us found our own different way of displaying the work for the presentation on the website. I think it's very interesting how like our observation of the work, and then also like the restrictions of our physical space sort of created and generated their own results that we never would have found if we didn't have to be in this situation. But also in talking to all of you, it's so exciting to hear your thoughts on also viewing the work in this new space, or in this sort of hybrid form of exhibition. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak on the differences of having these ones here.
I can, because mine was different than I think everyone else's. In that mine, so I had Heesoo's work, and you know, Heesoo's work is a video work, and so while I would put this is of one of 2 Heesoo's videos during our like PLAySPACE, you know, stuff like this for programming and whatnot. I got to choose when and where it was going to go, which I guess in some ways made it more like a functional object, in that I could turn it on and turn it off. It was really a decision to like, okay, I'm gonna engage with it, rather than, you know, that experience that Youyou was just talking about, saying like, I would wake up and it was there and I would go to sleep and it was there, which I'm sure was your experience too, Leandra, and as well, and Emily. So it was really different, because I could also take it with me, right? I brought it to my grandma's house before she moved out into a condo, because I found she just has like a really iconic bathroom, because it has those like Hollywood lights. And when I was little, I'd be like, this is where I would like lip sync to music, you know. And yeah, and I had tried taking it outside a couple times when it was warm enough for us to work outside. So it was really different, because it was like, in this way, I was like, you know, it was like Heesoo's ancestors lived in my projector box. And I would take them different places with me and like let them out. I found it very spectral in that way, that they were attached to me rather than my home. So yeah, that was my experience with that work.
Emily, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about, because your project was so much about being with Esther's rug over time. And I feel like you really documented that probably the most out of any of us. So I'm curious if you can just speak a little bit to that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have visited that section of the website, I periodically added new, webcam shots of myself. I'm now back at my home in New York, so it's no longer behind me. But for the entire duration of the semester, anytime I had a call, it was very, very prominent behind me, the rug piece hidden. And I think even just mentioning the title of the work really speaks to kind of like the layers of paradox that were going into my decision to put it in such a prominent place, in the sense that it, it became this focal point of any moment that I was ostensibly in public, right? Like facing colleagues in jobs, or facing, you all, my cohort, in school events or in class, and even like having social calls over Zoom. And so the fact that it, wasn't mine to keep, it's not my belonging. And I really had hung it there primarily because of its size, right? In terms of that scale consideration, that was the best place it fit. And then, the fact that it also became like a tool for me to sort of like distract from the rest of my space, as Leandra was kind of alluding to, like the sort of intrusion on privacy, the fact that my primary office and school workspace for the past few months was, my bedroom in San Francisco, as I live in a house with other people. And kind of the vulnerability that comes from having, your bed on full view every time you're on a professional Zoom call. And so having Hidden so prominent, and, it's so vibrant, and there's so much going on in the work, even though it was quite far away from me in the background, it definitely was something that, everyone, the first time I talked to them on Zoom, would mention it. And so it really became part of sort of like the version of me I was projecting in the Zoom universe. And I think the content of the work, which Esther could speak to much better than I can, but my interpretation of the content of the work is very similar, in the sense that it's about a public-facing projection of oneself and one's identity, kind of at odds with or struggling with other things that you're sort of keeping under the rug, as it literally depicts in the work, if you have a chance to look at the images. So yeah, I mean, over time, I think really the main thing of interest for me as I scroll through that page of all those images I collected, I didn't remember to do it every single day, but there are quite a number of them. And I tried not to be like posing. I tried to actually be like in motion, so that it would capture me like at a kind of random pose. And, like the weather changes, my mood changes, my hair changes. And I just think kind of the daily ritual of, who I was in that image is changing, but where I am and like what that tells you about me, or what you infer about me from my background, is stagnant. And I think that's really interesting and is very kind of the moment. And that's what makes, even though the content of the work draws so much on Esther's personal history, as well as kind of a longer history, much longer cultural history, that makes the photographs of it that I took kind of makes it even more contemporary. Not to like toot my own horn in any way, but I think that's what makes, this very tactile work kind of transcend into the Zoom world in a relevant way. I don't know if Esther, if you have anything to add to or respond to about that, but yeah.
You said it perfectly.
I kind
I
of
would be curious to sort of push the question the other way. I think a lot of artists bringing their work out of the studio and into a gallery space, like a very clean gallery space, especially, and Heesoo was even alluding to this earlier, I think, taking over a gallery space, or, even being in concert with other works, can give you a new perspective on your work, either aesthetically or content-wise. And that can be really illuminating in one's process, especially if you're a younger artist or you haven't exhibited frequently. And I'm wondering if this seeing images or seeing documentation of us all having your works in our homes has had a similar or opposite impact on your thoughts about either these specific works or like your practice in general. Like, has it raised any kind of new considerations that a typical setting or the studio setting has not shown you before?
As an artist, I'm very interested in visual vocabulary. And I think right now there's a lot of things that are, we're just oversaturated with media. And with that comes imagery, and that imagery informs what we think of images later on. So for instance, before all of this, I included a lot of tissue boxes in my composition, and that served as an icon for sadness. But as this developed, I thought of it more as an icon for pathology and for virology and for sickness. And where those two things meet are very interesting to me as well, and how it can, a tissue box can illuminate a discussion about sickness and about sadness, and where those things meet, I think, is mental illness. And so that is something that I think is already prevalent in my work, and then it just kind of brings it up even further. So I think with new times and new images, it really does inform how I'm going to use our collective visual vocabulary to create my own stories. So that's been a big influence for me, is just, looking at the images we're oversaturated with in contemporary Western media, and and seeing how I can use these images to tell my own stories and evoke that semantic relationship we have with a single image to create my story, my sentence, my painting. Hi, guys, this is Zelda. My puppy, she's new, so she needs attention all the time.
So I think this exhibition gave me some inspiration about how to reinterpret the activity of sharing videos, actually. So recently I was, I had another online show in a gallery, and I could experience like pricing the video for my for the first time. And so it was my first time to think about like the copy of the video, like sending the video, and so it happened at the same time during this exhibition. So I thought I could think a lot about even though it doesn't have physical material, but I got some ideas about it. And also even though it's just digital file, actually I believe the video is with my body and my ancestors' body there. So it reminds me of how to interpret my practice too. And also personally, I think the digital file itself is some kind of amulet to put the shamanism amulet kind of thing. Even though it's really small thing, I can put a lot of things inside, and it's some kind of magical experience and magical activity. So during this pandemic, I could learn a lot about the conceptual reinterpretation about what I'm doing right now. Yeah, it was quite inspiring experience for me.
I mean, also to get a little real, I think that, having an existential crisis as an artist right now is, I mean, it's not just about, the content. I think a lot of us are thinking about our careers as a whole and what they mean now. And it's very strange. It feels, as someone who is very interested in her tiny little, very frivolous obsessions, it feels like a very strange time to be involved in them. But it's a delicate balance of constantly being in that existential crisis, and then but staying motivated and realizing that there are there is a space and place for this. And yeah, I wanted to put that out there as well, because it felt like we were having a conversation that was like of the art and in the art, and not really acknowledging the larger picture of where it's taking place and how that can have friction.
I think you're, oh, I don't know if you're still speaking, Christina, but you, okay.
Just talking to my dog to stop barking.
But yeah, I mean that I keep thinking of the last 2 months as like a season, sort of as an exhibition season, but also because it was sort of the most stable 2 months of like the last year for me. But you know, the things were relatively the same the last 2 months, and so interacting with the artworks in this way has really punctuated the experience of this fall for me, but also the aspect of being very isolated and not having social interaction outside of my home has definitely amplified my tendency to refer to the artworks as like my companions, and you know, maybe my reflections on having them in the space are definitely more active, I think, than they would be at any other time. I mean, trying to organize the sort of reflections that I was making to put on the website. I sort of cycled through a lot of different ideas that were all like me, like talking to the artworks like day to day, or sort of thinking of like, you know, books they reminded me of, or stories they reminded me of, or different things that other people were doing, you know, in this COVID isolation, to interact with, you know, artworks and exhibitions, like those museum challenges of recreating artworks in your home and things like that. Like, what's the relationship of those things to having these artworks in my home? So yeah, I mean, there's so many new forms of this like remote society's way of relating to things, and that have really colored my experience of this exhibition the last 2 months. And I have a question for Esther about this, because you said you make your artwork for the home, and you really challenge people to sort of reinstill the use of these objects, even in a gallery setting. So exhibiting the objects in the home, but also in this sort of strange context and time, was this something that sort of met the idea that you have for your work generally, of it being in a domestic setting, or was there anything sort of different, or I guess sort of added to it by the current context?
Yeah, it's funny because, yeah, in a lot of ways, it was the perfect setting for these pieces. I don't know. Emily, did you ever play backgammon?
Yeah, so I don't think it's up yet, but I did make a video of myself listening to a YouTube video about how to play, and then trying to by myself with myself. Yeah, but I did kind of like take time to like read several websites, and then I had listened to this video obviously before I sat down to make the video, which is just a few minutes long. But yeah, I attempted to learn even though I didn't have a playing mate.
Yeah, I think that would be the final step, would just be full use of the objects, the rug on the floor, and the playing of the game. And I think part of me is also really excited at the idea of these objects being worn down, or used, and showing use, and being, aged and loved. And so yeah, for this specific work, I really enjoyed that it was in someone's home and was going through the everyday, even just excitement at a new object, and then kind of a getting used to it. And then I kind of think this was a expedited life and death of an object that you would buy or own. Eventually it's no longer useful, or is kind of put into a different room so a new object can take its place. And so that's really nice. I think that arc being represented in this show.
Shay, did you have an extra experience kind of like that about the life of the art object with Cathy's work? Especially, I know from that moment when you had it all set up on the table versus when you were like, I'm going to disperse it around my apartment.
Yeah, I mean, I never used Cathy's artworks as objects, as functional objects. But I did, so I wouldn't say like there was any, promise there was no wearing down on them, Cathy. But I mean, my relationship with them definitely evolved after I dispersed them around my home. They felt more, well, they felt less like stress inducing for me, because it was sort of like their power got dispersed a little bit. I don't know how else to, sort of like their affect dispersed a bit. And they became a bit more approachable, and I think they blended in a bit more with their surroundings. And in that setting, I don't know, this kind of goes back to what Leandra was saying. I think like I felt like I befriended them a little bit more. Like I just removed like this little grouping that I had on my dresser, which was like a little Buddha with a gold sheet mask on, and like a chia pet with a sheet mask on, and like the nail of like the hands with acrylic nails, which is kind of like a creepy assemblage to put in my bedroom. Like, I don't think my girlfriend liked it very much, but I really, no offense, Cathy, I loved it, but I miss them now. Like, they're not there, and it feels empty. So yeah, definitely a relationship that shifted over time. Yeah.
That's funny. I actually kind of have, I guess, both an anecdote and a question to the group, which is just this like this phenomenon of kind of getting to know the artists that were in our home without actually knowing, like, through their work. Heesoo and I had a conversation where we were like, I just feel like I know you even though we've never met each other. Like, we actually had met each other once really quickly. And at all during her solo show, and I was a recipient of a towel. But, because Heesoo's work is so personal, and I kind of reflected on what Les Maisons, like what imagining a different time for my ancestors could look like, both in, like I said, in my grandma's home and in my own home. And so, you know, we both were like, yeah, it's so weird that I know this much about like your family, even though we've never had like coffee together or anything. So I guess I'm wondering if anyone else started to feel that way after a couple weeks.
I definitely feel, I mean, it's so funny. This is the first time I've seen Kathy's face. But I feel like, especially for how much care and like attention I've given these objects over the past couple months, and how embedded in my everyday life they've become, like, I don't know, I do definitely feel some sort of, like, I know at least like that part of you that's embodied in that work, or like that mark of your hand or whatever sort of physicality is transferred to it.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, there are, the beginning of this exhibition, I looked up a lot of writing about Maria's work that talked about the fabric and about the softness in relation to the body about your pieces. But then you responded so positively to what Shay had written about your work and about the notion of hybridity and transformation, but also this sort of feeling that we are, as you see in Possess, that we are also like interwoven with each other, and how many of these entanglements are really what make up our experiences as an individual, but that the experiences fed by this sort of collective existence. And so I've thought about these things so much, about how, you know, just being with the work in the same space, which is kind of funny because this is a digital background. This is like the one week I wasn't able to zoom in with the work itself, but being with the work in the space and thinking about how the materiality speaks to that, it made me want to talk to you like every day. And in this strange way, as you know, I knew that I couldn't, and that, you know, I was supposed to be producing content for the show that all of these thoughts would go to, but being able to see your work also at Part 2 Gallery, and I guess generally being you know, online throughout the course of this exhibition, and seeing you react to posts and things like that. I felt very connected to you, even though we haven't been able to sit down together in the way that I normally would like to with people, to really.
I was wondering how you still had sunlight, you know. But no, it's been wonderful. And it's been wonderful to see your response to the work and to see the pieces in your home. And I do feel like it was great to read what Catherine and Shaelyn had wrote about the work, and the way how the viewer and, you know, us, the collective, comes into the pieces that I make with interpretations and how people connect to them. And I loved seeing your recreation of the piece that you did. And yeah, I mean, and I talk to my pieces all the time. So I thought it was great that you saw them as companions as well, because I'm like, yeah, they're great listeners. So thank you so much.
Does anyone have any last questions, or looking around? Seems like a nice closing thought to end on. Okay, well, thank you all so much for being here with us tonight and for trusting us with your works, and yeah, going on this sort of like strange experiment with us. I know it was not what you originally signed up for, and we are so grateful to you for, exploring with us. It's been a privilege.
Yeah, and also the website will stay up until the domain expires. So while I'm just saying, while our like engagements with it are, over to an extent, that website is there for the next, I think, 8-ish months.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you and especially to Esther.
Absolutely, and thank you for all being here today. I mean, all day I was turning the phrase over in my mind, like we're pulling the dispersed exhibition into one place for one time. But it is truly such a pleasure to have all of you here and talk about all of your work. I mean, the way that they speak to each other and the way that your different modes of working and thinking and what you bring to your pieces, they interact with each other in ways that have been extremely generative for me. So thank you so much. I wish we all could celebrate together, but one day we can.
Thank you so much for this grateful dialogues. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. This was great. I really appreciate it. And one day we will all meet up. Not that far. There's a deadline. There's an actual end site. So.
So y'all get that vaccine, we'll buy a round of drinks.
Okay.
Well, thank you everyone again for being here, and hopefully we can stay all in touch. Okay, I'm going to end the meeting now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, good night.
Bye, thank you.